together, and the comprehensive economic partnership helping to level and bring reduced tariffs in these areas. Overall, the principles of Pharma 4.0 are driving more efficient, smarter, and particularly patient-centered pharmaceutical manufacturing. Much more emphasis on the patient than we've seen in the past. Next slide, please. This is the policy from the government of Japan, the healthcare policy. We see government of Japan is promoting their grand design for pharmacy and medical device regulatory harmonization. Japan Aid, JICA in particular, has not been particularly active in the pharmaceutical area before. Now we're seeing a massive change. They're really promoting, through the Asian Wellbeing Initiative, this principles of harmonization, getting all the countries to agree to use the same standards. Whilst the writing on the screen's a little small, the key points around this is for all countries in Asia to adopt international standards, to follow WHO guidelines, and to get them to accept that if it's approved by the Japanese regulatory authorities, then all countries in the region can accept that. They don't have to go through the whole of the regulatory process again themselves. They can accept Japanese regulatory approvals. Finally, something a little bit different, increased use of the Japanese pharmacopoeia. Why might that appeal to countries? Everyone's familiar with USP, the United States Pharmacopoeia, BP, the British Pharmacopoeia. Not many people know that much about the Japanese Pharmacopoeia. It scores in two important points. Firstly, it is in English as well as Japanese, and it's free. USP and BP are a major cost, typically over $1,000 each. These are available online and it's free. That's one reason to look seriously at the Japanese Pharmacopoeia, which does conform to international standards and itself is being harmonized with the other pharmacopoeia. So there's major forces driving harmonization and regional cooperation throughout Asia, being led and funded by Japan. Next slide, please. Well, this regulatory harmonization starts off with the MRAs, the Mutual Recognition Agreements. What that means if one country in the region, the regulatory authority for pharmaceuticals or medical equipment has already processed that item, then other countries don't need to do it again. They will accept the regulatory approval from Malaysia or from Singapore and not have to duplicate the whole process of national regulation and vetting. Right now, the MRAs are in place for good manufacturing practice inspections, for bioavailability and bioequivalence. That's a major step forward. Approved in one country doesn't need to be repeated. Other countries will accept that approval under the MRA agreements, these mutual recognition agreements. And all of that's encapsulated into the ASEAN pharmaceutical regulatory policy. What that means for manufacturers is I no longer need to go and get 32 national regulatory approvals. I get one and it's accepted by all the other countries in the region. It's a major step forward. It's not quite there yet. Not full approval, not full MRAs. So far only for GMPs, bioavailability and bioequivalent, but more are coming all the time. And a key point around that is it's based on the ICH, the international standards. Next slide, please. Well, is it really happening? I mean, people have been talking about this harmonization for 25 years. I was at one of the first meetings in Jakarta of the ASEAN Harmonization Committee. 20 years on, they hadn't even agreed the terms of reference. How is it happening now? How all of a sudden, after talking about it for 20 years, has it started to happen? And we're seeing these ASEAN Common Technical Dossier for submission of regulatory approvals throughout the region. It is all happening. Next slide, please. Why is it happening? Because of digitization, electronic documentation, and software. As countries are moving to electronic submission of medicines and medical devices for regulatory approval, they don't want to rewrite all the software again. They want to use a standardized software package, and that's driving the harmonization. As they move to a standardized digital package for regulatory submission, so submission can be online, all electronic now, instead of 15 kilos of paper for the regulatory dossier, we can send in electronic format, and also the rise of AI, artificial intelligence, in regulatory processes, both for the manufacturer, so the manufacturer collects the information needed for regulatory approval using AI, and for the regulatory authority who uses AI to screen and analyze the dossier on regulatory submissions. That's driving this change. So after 20 years of talking, trying to get harmonization, it really is this digitization and artificial intelligence which is driving the harmonization. Everybody wants to use the same software. Everybody wants to use the same methodology now. Next slide, please. Well, why is it working in Asia and not so much in other places? Because Asia has got the highest rate of adoption of artificial intelligence. Europe is talking about it. North America is talking about the AI, but Asia is the region that is doing it. There are concerns in Europe about AI. Not everyone is rushing to adopt it. They're similar in North America. There are concerns about AI. But in Asia, there is a breakneck adoption of artificial intelligence, and we're seeing the impact on regulatory affairs. And we see this major article from Yan Huan at University of Oxford, the difference it's making in transforming the landscape of regulatory affairs. Again, both sides. For the manufacturer, it makes it much easier for them, and for the regulatory authority, it makes it much easier for them. And that's driving major changes in time. It can take years on the paper-based system to get a new medicine through regulatory approval. With AI, it's taking months. It's a massive change. Next slide, please. Regulatory harmonization brings many benefits. And on the screen now, we can see, particularly around one area, is clinical trials. The harmonization on the clinical trials means you don't need to repeat the clinical trials in every country where you're applying for regulatory approval. It's a massive step forward. It reduces the time for approval. And that reduced approval time brings reduced costs, both for the regulatory authority and for the manufacturer, which translates to lower prices. Next slide, please. WHO has long advocated for regulatory harmonization. But again, that's now starting to come forward with the supporting the implementation of the harmonized regulation, the CHAR project. We're really seeing that pushing forward, starting with recognition, moving on to full acceptance, these MRA agreements, mutual recognition agreements. That's driving forward. So regulatory harmonization is now happening. Next slide, please. Well, what about this innovation? Well, that again is a massive change. New medicines have traditionally come from North America and Europe, and there's been relatively little development in Asia of new medicines and new medical devices. We're now seeing a major change. Japan has more than 2,000 new drugs in development. That's in the pipeline. China, massive number, 1,600. And South Korea, over 1,000. Countries like Bangladesh are now starting to develop new medicines on their own. A massive change. Well, what's bringing about, what's driving this change in innovation? which has traditionally not been one of Asia's strong points. All the innovation has come from North America and Europe. And now we're seeing Japan, South Korea, and China heavily involved in R&D spending and new drug implementation. Next slide, please. Part of this is because of the income from the sales of generic products. So for a long time, Asia has been promoting generic products. They're using the funding from the sales of generic medicines to invest in research and development. And that's a major change. In the past, the funding from generic sales went straight into profits. Now it's been invested in research and development, and we're seeing this massive explosion of new drug development within the Asia region. Countries like Bangladesh are investing in R&D and coming forward. India, of course, China, Japan, and Japan linking with India. So research undertaken in Japan, manufacturing undertaken in India, and cross-fertilization both ways, developing throughout the region. Next slide, please. Well, just have a reality check on the innovation. Whilst I've said it's powering ahead, it doesn't mean every country in Asia is inventing new drugs. We see the story here, which is Thailand is bemoaning the fact that they feel left behind. They haven't been involved in major research and development. And the point around that is, without that innovation, they're not likely to become one of the regional pharmaceutical hubs. We need that link to innovation and the new medicines to drive forward the concept of becoming a hub. So instead of establishing your own distribution systems in 10 countries, you make a hub and you distribute from there to the 10 countries. A major change, innovation linked with the hub technique, the hub system. But not all countries are doing it, and they're now feeling left behind. So it's something that needs to be considered across the board if they want to act as a hub. Next slide, please. Well, what's happening on the supply chain? Well, COVID really shook up the supply chain. That really brought about problems. It really put the focus on cold chain and not having it, and last mile logistics, being able to get products through. I mean, during COVID, we were so short on cold chain, we were having to use ice cream factories. We were requisitioning ice cream factories to store vaccines and cold chain products because we didn't have enough cold chain. So COVID really was a shake-up for us. And we need to look again at cold chain. We're seeing this new focus on patient-specific logistics, how to get the last mile there. But that's difficult because we have a very diverse region. So we've got high-income countries like Singapore, and we've got low-income countries like India. India and China with 13,000 distributors, 60,000 across the whole region. That's a massive number to cope with and to do. And many of these distributors don't have the skills and the knowledge for medical products. They don't have adequate cold chain. They're not securing the link across there. Again, brought home to us by COVID, we didn't have adequate capacity in the cold chain to service the volumes that we needed. Next slide, please. So in the supply chain, we're seeing major developments of increasing the capacity for cold chain of temperature control logistics. Massive increases across the whole region, not just for vaccines, but increasingly for thermolabile pharmaceutical products, particularly the new innovation products that are coming along. We need those cold chain facilities, and we need the technical know-how about how to transport cold chain items. Also, we're seeing pharmaceutical companies are increasingly outsourcing. Instead of the manufacturer operating their own distribution system, they're saying that countries change and are different so much. We need specific logistics for each country. And even within a country, we need specific logistics. Doesn't mean that all the products are outsourced or all the areas, but some of them are outsourced. We take the example of Indonesia, 7,000 tiny islands. That's a completely different distribution system than in the major city of Jakarta of 10 million people. How do we get through the traffic? Entirely different transport approaches. So companies are looking at outsourcing to specialists in each of these areas. How do we get small deliveries to little islands? How do we get deliveries through the traffic into big city areas? And in temperature-controlled systems efficiently and effectively. New approaches because of COVID. Next slide, please. Yeah, if you go to the next slide, please. Okay. Sorry, we're there. Okay. Distribution hubs. We're seeing this. It's a distribution hub. Typically, it's been Singapore. The reason for Singapore is because of customs. It's very easy to get materials in and get them out again around the region. We're now seeing the major logistic service providers, the LSPs, are using in hub systems. So they put it regionally. Instead of bringing from Europe, North America, directly into each individual country, they'll come into a hub like Singapore or Malaysia. Increasingly, Malaysia, because of changes in customs, means it's easier to get materials in and out again to other countries, because in the ASEAN region, there are already agreements on no tariff trades. Looking at linking together places, for example, Vietnam is starting to become a logistics hub because of its low wages and its strategic location to China. So the trend now is to use blockchain to give us complete visibility of the supply chain and use regional hubs. And that regional hubs is forcing regional cooperation, countries working together to move materials around the region. So Thailand manufactures the most anti-snake venom. How does it get distributed? Through the regional hubs. Because throughout the region, there is tariff-free movement of pharmaceuticals. It can happen very quickly. Next slide, please. Well, what's driving these trends in supply chain? And it really is digital supply chain management. And by digital, we don't mean Excel sheets. We're talking about sophisticated algorithms, artificial intelligence, fully linked digitized systems, which are automatic to a large extent because of the algorithms involved. Also because of e-bidding and e-tendering. It means that the shift towards digitization is being promoted by both ends. Manufacturers are pushing it, the recipients are pushing it, so as to get a complete joined up supply chain. AI is increasingly growing, particularly in the private sector, because it's so cost efficient. It saves money. But also there's a major trend, which is the recognition of how do we distribute low-cost items competitively. So for low-cost generic medicines, the cost of the transport can be more than the cost of the medicine. So it's imperative that I have efficient supply chains. And that's where that regional hubs come into their own, because they allow that to happen. They allow bulk shipment into a hub and then smaller shipments combined with many products together in that area. Next slide, please. Complexity of government frameworks. Well, that's still a problem. Even though most countries in the region have now joined the PICS regulatory harmonization system, that's the Pharmaceutical Inspection Convention, so they've all agreed to use the same standards, we're seeing that there are still differences in registration and regulatory approval dossiers. Some countries have special regulations like halal requirements for Indonesia, but even in countries which have adopted electronic systems, we're still saying that they still insist on paper. So it's a belt and braces approach. They still want paper submissions along with the electronic submissions. That makes it more difficult. So although digitization is driving harmonization, we should realize that there is still individual government regulations to overcome. They are being reduced. The regional cooperation is working on it, but they're still in place, particularly for countries like China. It is still complex to import into China. Next slide, please. How do we overcome that complexity? With digitization. It really is driving alignment. It really is driving harmonization. And it's also improving the practice, not just among the regulatory authorities and the public government side, but among the manufacturers. All the manufacturers are harmonizing their good automated manufacturing practice, so that they are getting now quite similar. So when submissions are received for regulatory harmonization, they're already similar from the manufacturers. And the manufacturers are harmonizing, albeit by accident, amongst themselves in the way they approach it because of this need for GMP across the region. And we've seen this AI in pharma being adopted very fast throughout Asia, particularly among pharmaceutical manufacturers in the region. Next slide, please. But a word of caution here. We want more resilient, responsive, and equitable systems. Well, if we look at the chart of the government share of pharmaceutical spending, it's a little dated now, but the trend is still there. We're looking at Indonesia, where the government only funds about 14% of pharmaceuticals. If you're only funding 14–20% of pharmaceuticals, no amount of digitization and AI is going to give you an equitable pharmaceutical system. You have to have the basic policies in place for universal healthcare, for equitable health systems. If they're not in place, AI is not going to bring them. AI doesn't invent policies. It helps you, it's a tool to help implement them. At the other end of the scale, with Thailand and Brunei, where the government is funding 90% of the pharmaceutical supply for the country, frankly, AI is not going to bring a lot to you. You've already got an exceedingly equitable pharmaceutical system. You've got a huge amount of public sector support. It might make it more efficient, it might reduce the cost, but the equitable part, it's a marginal extra one. But for most countries who are in the middle range, they've got basic policies in place, they've got WHO guidelines in place. Here, AI and digitization can help you implement those policies. In the past, it's been difficult. There's been hurdles and blockages, and there's not been a lot of regional cooperation. But now, with AI digitization, you can help to implement those policies and move them forward and drive more resilient and equitable pharmaceutical systems. Asia is still a collection of national and subnational markets. It's still diverse. There's different disease patterns across the region. It's still not fully joined up. The point I'm making is it is starting to become that way. And it's going very fast. And this regional cooperation driven by AI is really having a massive impact on the pharmaceutical systems in place. Next slide, please. So for the resilient systems, and particularly following COVID, there's a great need for resilient systems. Regional cooperation fosters resilient systems. If we have these regional pharma hubs, then we can move medicines to where they're needed quickly. Promoting local manufacturing, not always the answer, but can be useful, and the linked with supply hubs becomes far more useful. These supply hubs for regional cooperation. addressing affordability and accessibility for vulnerable populations. That through the use of implementing long-held equitable policies, universal healthcare policies, equitable pharmaceutical supplies. Digitization and AI can assist with the implementation. And there's already the Asian Development Bank report on how to build resilient health, and individual country reports, the example on the screen from Malaysia, of how to improve the resilience. And that is through a regional cooperation, working together so that we can transfer knowledge and materials between countries when they are needed. Next slide, please. Again, reality check, digitization and AI on their own are not able to bring the changes that are needed. They are tools to implement sound policies. If the sound policies are in place, digitization and AI will help drive their implementation. But just saying AI is not going to make it happen. You have to have the policies in place. Then digitization and AI can drive it. They will drive them. Often these policies are in place in most of the middle ground countries. They've been there for 20 years, but they've never been fully implemented. Now we have a chance to implement them. Now we have a chance to drive them forward because of this regional cooperations. My overall message is major advances are happening, and regional cooperation, long talked about, often rather dismissed as it's never going to happen, is now really happening, and it is driving major changes. Next slide, and I think that's nearly the last one. Yep. Yeah. And on to the next slide, please, and then, okay. There are many courses available. If you want to know more about this, courses are on the screen, and on the Empower and UNITAR websites, you can find details on all the different courses that are available on improving regulatory harmonization and overall drug management. Okay, we can go to the Q&A session now, I think, please. Just about 15 minutes left. Good.
Thank you so much, Prof. Andy, for that comprehensive and informative presentation. So for the Q&A session, we have 2 questions from Dr. Nasir Ahmad Stanikzai in the Q&A toolbox. Participants, feel free to leave the questions as I read out this. The first one, how are Asian pharma collaborations using AI for joint drug discovery, and what data challenges remain? And what regional digital health projects in Asia are enabling RWE integration across systems?
Okay, so the drug innovation in Asia is largely being driven by private companies rather than by government-sponsored R&D research. And Japan is taking the lead, although South Korea is coming along fast on that. So both the 2 high-tech giants there and also in China coming along fast. They are driving it. And increasingly, we're seeing Japan and South Korea linking with India. So cooperating together on drug innovation with low-cost manufacturing. To some extent also in Vietnam because of the lower-cost labor. Linking the high-tech research and development, and then passing part of that research and development into other countries like India. So yes, that's largely private sector driven at present. The hurdles, there are many. Although we've talked about harmonization, many countries still have their own regulations, want to do it in their own way. It's not easy to transfer labor between the two. It's not easy for Japanese staff to get to work in India, not easier for Indian staff to work in R&D in Japan, but it is happening, it is improving the 2 ways. So it's a developing one, and we hope it's going along fast. Okay.
Thanks, Prof. Andy. The next question is, what impact has regulatory alignment in Asia had on drug approvals and safety monitoring?
Drug approvals, I would say it's reduced the time massively. If we take the example of bedaquiline, the first new drug for TB in 40 years, 10 years on, it still wasn't approved in the majority of countries. 10 years after it's invented, it's still not got regulatory approval. Now we're seeing approvals coming in months. We saw it with COVID vaccine, approvals coming in 2 to 3 months. We're seeing it with new drugs developed now. Because if it's already approved in one country, you don't have to go through the whole of the regulatory process again. You can accept that regulatory approval. So reducing times for the approval, that reduces costs and brings that benefit as well. Safety, I would say everyone's concerned about safety, but with the harmonization, we're seeing that the safety standards are becoming aligned across the region. So we're actually seeing improvements in safety because we're moving to international standards instead of locally developed ad hoc standards. And that's bringing improvements in safety as well. Also, because of clinical trials being administered again by different authorities, we're seeing harmonization in international standards for the clinical trials, also improving safety, all to the same international standard.
Any risks of this developed in smaller states with no established regulatory framework?
Yes, there are risks, but this depends on whether your regulatory framework is recognized by other countries. If it's developed there, are they recognized? We're seeing Japan is trying to get its regulatory approval recognized by other countries, and there is harmonization. We see about 5 countries now in the region have got agreements for regulatory recognition. Not all countries have, and it may be a long time before they do. But if it's developed in a country which doesn't have a strong regulatory authority, it's not likely to be approved. It will need to get regulatory approval in one of the countries which is recognized on the MRA agreements. Not everyone has got an MRA agreement in place yet. Okay, but also the case in India is it doesn't matter in a sense where the drug is manufactured, the approval can be elsewhere. So we're seeing drugs manufactured in India, which have got USA regulatory approval, which have got European Medicine Agency regulatory approval. It's possible to get regulatory approval even if it's manufactured in a low-income country, which may not have its own national regulatory approval to international standards.
Thanks, Prof. Andy. How do we guard against entry of substandard and falsified medical products into the chain?
Right. It's a common problem, and it requires implementation of universal inspection standards. So even though there is regulatory harmonization, there also has to be on-arrival inspections. And knowing the chain of custody, where has the medicine come from, where has it been? And when we've got those international standards, it's possible to do. On-arrival inspections can make a huge difference. Even if it's only a visual inspection, it can make a huge difference. And particularly now, with the advent of handheld Raman laser spectroscopy, we can see immediate analysis through the packaging. I don't even need to open the blister. I can just point the gun straight at the medicine and get a reading. Is this a genuine product within 2 minutes? It's not foolproof. It's not 100% for everything, but it's a massive screening technique which will help reduce that. And we're seeing this impact of the immediate analysis on regulatory inspections on arrival in country. So it's not just regulatory approval, it is on arrival inspections throughout the country. Always for vigilance and chain of custody. If we follow international standards, we have a full chain of custody throughout. But increasingly, we don't follow international standards. And that's part of the regulatory harmonization to bring those international standards forward. Okay.
And perhaps the last question would be, what specific AI tools have helped India and China to build resilient regulatory systems?
Particularly for good manufacturing practice. There's a whole suite of AI tools available for good automated manufacturing practice. And for regulatory approvals, there's also a suite of AI tools available. These are specialist items. They are available for their particular uses. But the manufacturers will certainly, and you'll see lots of adverts for them on the web for the AI tools. There's a whole periphery of them available there.
Thanks, Prof. Andy, for addressing this important questions. I've been told by my colleagues that there were around 30 or 40 people joining right after we started the webinar. So if I may ask Emil to launch the poll number 1 again, So for us to collect the data and to get to know you better, thank you for leaving that in the chat as well, from where you're from and your backgrounds. But can you please participate in a poll? I'll give 2 minutes for that.
Siona, this seems to be the same poll, poll one.
Yes, we're collecting poll one because there are around 30 people joined a bit later.
Okay.
Emil, how are the responses so far?
They have only started to go, so wait a little bit, please.
While our participants are responding to the survey, I would like to take a moment to recognize the incredible value brought to us today by our speaker, Wendy. I'd also like to remind everyone that Empower School of Health, in collaboration with UNITAR, offers postgraduate diplomas in pharmaceutical management alongside other courses. Profendi shared the slides. Links will be shared in the chat. If I can ask my colleagues, Sonia and Emil, to share the links to the courses in the chat.
So the first poll, mostly our participants are male, like 63% and 33% female. Also mostly from 30 to 40 years old. From the half of the participants are from Africa and Middle East, and the other half mostly from South Asia. We have people with a background from pharmacy and master and PhD, management, public health, medicine. Even mostly participants have more than 15 years of experience. Then we also see that participants represent different sectors. And I think we can move on to the next poll.
Yeah, great to see such a demographic. If we're gonna launch the next poll, just for us to understand how this webinar matched your interests and your expectations. Emil, what are the results so far while participants are responding? Can you give us a brief analysis?
Our participants only finished the poll, and they represent different sectors such as pharmaceutical industry, government, academic and research institutions, NGOs, public health organizations. So mostly they're all familiar with regional pharmaceutical collaborations in Asia. They believe that the most benefits from regional pharma collaborations they can see in vaccine development, distribution, also in the supply chain resilience and regulatory harmonization. They think that the biggest driver of regional collaborations in Asia's pharmacy industry are digitalization and AI, pandemic preparedness, economic growth and trade agreements, global health equity, and so on and so forth. Then the biggest challenges are mostly lack of coherent health policies and regulatory misalignment, political or trade barriers, they all strongly believe that Asia is on track to become a global pharma innovation hub. And I think most of them are interested in this working group and this session. 78%.
Great to see that many of you are actively working in different fields, and these discussions are really crucial for shaping discourse on the future of pharmaceutical industries in Asia and beyond. With that, I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to our speaker, Prof. Andy, and to all of you for joining us today. We hope to see you again for our next webinar.